Now, I thought this would be a good idea for a video series over the international break. In 4 installments, I'm going to talk about who I think and statistically who are the best players at each price point by position. And in this episode, we're going to talk about goalkeepers. So before I get into talking about some individual goalkeepers, I thought it'd be best to review teams in general in terms of how they've performed defensively, because obviously goalkeepers, yes, they can have some say in how they get on, but ultimately it's also down to the defense that plays in front of them and the rest of the team around them as to how many clean sheets, etc., that they keep. So I thought it'd be worth reviewing how teams as a whole are performing defensively so far this season. And I'm definitely not taking into account the difficulty of fixtures these teams have faced so far. So that's something to bear in mind as well when looking at this data. So, for example, Liverpool, they've only conceded 2 goals in the league so far this season, but they've definitely had one of the best starts, I would say, in terms of quality of fixtures. So that's just something to bear in mind when looking at this data, I would suggest. But looking at the best defences in the league so far this season in terms of actual goals conceded, right? We've got Liverpool as the number 1, to only 2 goals conceded. Arsenal and Nottingham Forest joint second, 6 goals conceded. Newcastle on 7, a whole bunch of teams on 8. And then, well, your bottom teams there, you've got Southampton and Everton on 15. I think that's, 15 for Southampton as well. And then 21 goals conceded for Wolves, right? But Wolves have definitely had one of the tougher starts to the season, but they certainly haven't looked all that impressive defensively regardless, I would say. Then in terms of expected goals conceded, so this is obviously the quality, an assessment of the quality of chances that they've faced and, the amount of goals that would be expected to be scored from the quality of the chances that they've given up, if that makes sense. Whereas goals against is actual times the ball has crossed the goal line, right? Liverpool again, a number 1, 5.72. Fulham, Tottenham make up the top 3. Then we got Villa, Arsenal, Man City, Chelsea, Forest as the rest of the teams there. And you can see bottom teams in terms of expected goals conceded are kind of in and around the same as actual goals against, right? Everton, Wolves, Southampton, Leicester and Ipswich. So hopefully this data here gives you an idea of the defensive performance of various teams so far. And then next, I just wanted to look at some kind of data projection or metric, etc., that ranked teams by fixtures coming up. So this is over the next 6 game weeks and the quality of fixtures teams have defensively and kind of how many clean sheets and how they're expected to perform defensively, basically, right? So the best fixtures defensively for the next 6, or at least the best team for the next 6 fixtures, next 6 game weeks, ranked by fixtures is Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, Crystal Palace, Brighton, Everton, Villa and Fulham. And you can see the bottom teams there. I won't go through them all, but I thought it'd be worth looking at, data in terms of defensive performance so far and then a projection of defensive performance to come based on the quality of fixtures. So hopefully that's a little bit of useful data and metrics to get you started. Right, into some goalkeepers, actual players themselves now. What I've done is I've got kind of 3 different price points that I wanted to talk about. So we've got the premium goalkeepers here. I'll talk about some mid-price goalkeepers in a second and then some cheaper, more value ones, so 4.5 to 5 million basically. In terms of the premium goalkeepers in the game right now, there's 3. You've got Ederson, Raya and Alisson. Those are the 3, main starters, if you like. Ortega's in this price category as well, but Ederson does appear to still be that Man City starting goalkeeper. For me, there's one outstanding goalkeeper, but we'll go through all 3. So Ederson, 7 starts, started every game. 1 clean sheet from his 7 starts, and he's got bar Alisson, the fewest saves made so far. Well, I guess per 90, that's the fewest, right? Alisson's played 1 less game. So Ederson has kept the least clean sheets and has the lowest saves per 90. Raya's kept 3 clean sheets, 3.6 saves per 90. So, I guess kind of middle of the road, but a decent amount of clean sheets from those 7 fixtures, but the most saves per 90 of all the goalkeepers on this list. Alisson, kind of middle of the pack in terms of saves, but he's kept 4 clean sheets from his first 6 fixtures. But he's obviously done his hamstring, I believe, so he's going to be out till November. So ultimately, when you're looking at the premium goalkeepers, the number 1 to pick, right, is David Raya. He's fit, which Alisson obviously isn't right now, and he's making more saves, keeping more clean sheets than Ederson. So I think in terms of ranking the best premium goalkeepers going forwards, it's got to be David Raya. Okay, next up, we've got a few more goalkeepers at this price point. We've got the mid-price goalkeepers. So basically, this is 4.8 million and above, with obviously Pickford on this list being the cheapest. So All of these players have started 7 games, and you can see on the clean sheets, Onana with the most, 4, Pope and Vicario both keeping 2, and the rest keeping 1. In terms of saves made, Pope is kind of in a league of his own with 31 saves. You got Pickford, Leno, Onana, Martinez, kind of middle of the pack, and then Vicario only making 15 so far. In terms of saves per 90, obviously they've all played 7 games, so the ranking is kind of similar as to what we've just said. Expected goals conceded wise, Villa and Martinez are, well, way out in front of the pack with only 6.9 expected goals conceded, right? You look at Pickford and Onana, both on above 11, Leno on 8.2, Pope on 10.1, and Vicario on 7.9. And how does that translate per 90? Well, Martinez has actually got 0.98 expected goals conceded per 90. Pickford and Onana are in and around 1.6, the worst. Leno, Pope, Vicario kind of on the middle ground. I tend to say, for me, right, the best goalkeepers in FPL are ones that keep kind of an average amount of clean sheets across the season. Bearing in mind, Everton have had some pretty tough fixtures to start things. Lots of injuries in their defence as well. So I think that has meant that it's been a little bit unfair, I would say, in terms of Pickford's performance so far. And I would expect that to improve as defenders get fit again and the fixtures kind of turn. But yeah, going back to that point, average amount of clean sheets, good amount of saves. There, in my mind, are a couple of goalkeepers that kind of tick that box, particularly in this price point. And I would say, for me, it's Pickford and Onana. Both are averaging nearly 3. Wow, if you round it up at least, you can't make 2.86 or 2.71 saves, right? They're averaging 3 saves per 90, which is worth a saves bonus point. Onana has kept, a clean sheet in more than 50% of his games. I know Pickford's only kept 1, but I do expect that to improve with the Everton defence. So for me, my 2 picks of the mid-price defenders would be Pickford and Onana. Right, the next bunch of players. Sorry, it's a little bit text heavy and boring, but I didn't have room to put some player pictures on this screen because there are so many goalkeepers that are playing regularly that are at this price point, right? So we've got Sanchez, Kepa, Flecken, Verbruggen, Hermansen of Leicester, Sells of Forest, Areola, Henderson, Muric, Ramsdale, and Johnson. I'm not going to talk about each of these players individually because I'll be here for ages, but I kind of wanted to group them into various categories. So I think one category is a goalkeeper that makes a relatively low amount of saves per 90, but their team is pretty frugal. And I would say there's one goalkeeper at this price point that kind of ticks that box, and that's Sells. Compared to others on this list, he's much lower in terms of saves per 90, but expected goals conceded per 90 and goals conceded themselves, Nottingham Forest rank quite highly. So with Sells, you're probably not going to get as many saves as other goalkeepers are going to make, but I would expect him to keep more than most in terms of clean sheets. And then I think you've got a group of goalkeepers that are probably fairly balanced in terms of saves plus clean sheets, although to be honest, there aren't actually all that many. Some of them haven't kept a clean sheet all season, and most of the rest have only kept 1. But I would probably say Henderson ticks that box, 3 saves per 90 and actually has a clean sheet under his belt. Muric kind of ticks that box as well. Who else? We've got Sanchez, 4.7 saves per 90, 2 clean sheets so far. I think you're probably getting an idea of my favourites at this price point. So that kind of summarises the sort of mid-tier of total clean sheets plus saves. And then you've got goalkeepers that are kind of just monsters for making saves, but not necessarily keeping clean sheets. So Kepa and Flecken are averaging, if you round it up, 5 saves per 90. Ramsdale around the same. Johnston around 4. That kind of gives you an idea of kind of categorization of goalkeepers at this price point, I would say. You've got Sells, who is one that doesn't make as many saves as the rest, but I would expect to keep more clean sheets. The likes of Sanchez, Dean Henderson, I know they've only got 1 or 2 clean sheets, but I would expect them to keep more clean sheets than probably most of the goalkeepers on this list and get like an average amount of saves. And then you've got the other goalkeepers that I mentioned that will definitely keep less clean sheets, but in terms of saves volume, they'll probably produce bonus kind of every game. Personally, with kind of all that in mind, I think there are 4 goalkeepers that I'd have as my favourites. I didn't even talk about Kelleher on the last list, right? Thing is with Kelleher, right, there's not much data to back him up. He's got 1 game under his belt, right? 7 saves, which is obviously 7 saves per 90, and he kept a clean sheet in it. So in terms of data, with only 1 game as a sample size, he's a bit of a monster. And I would say just based on Liverpool's defensive performance so far this season, and with Alisson being out until kind of November time, well, exactly how long that's going to be, we're not totally sure. But if you have the opportunity to, maybe sell a goalkeeper to get Kelleher in and take a bit of a punt, he's obviously going to be low owned. I don't think many people are going to be transferring him in. So he could be a nice differential for you there. Of course, we've only got 1 game as kind of his sample size of data. But given how well Liverpool have performed defensively so far this season, you can see there it made 7 saves in that game where he kept a clean sheet. He's obviously good for clean sheets and saves as well. Outside of that, I think my other 3 highlights, I'd definitely say Rob Sanchez is up there. Kept a couple of clean sheets. He's actually, joint top on this list for saves per 90 and only conceded 1.1 XG per 90. Sales, like I said, pretty frugal in terms of Forest defence. The lowest expected goals conceded per 90 on this list, but also one of the lowest in terms of saves per 90, if not the lowest. Just ahead of Verbruggen by the looks of it. And then Dean Henderson, I think across the season, and especially remembering back to those fixture difficulty rankings for defences, if we just go back to that one, Crystal Palace are actually 3rd, which makes Dean Henderson the best goalkeeper at this price point for defensive fixtures coming up. So I think with all that in mind, he'd be one of my picks at this price point. So yeah, with everything I've said there, I think I can pick out 4 players that I think are the standouts at this price point. You've got Rob Sanchez of Chelsea, Sells of Nottingham Forest, Henderson of Crystal Palace, and obviously Kelleher of Liverpool. I didn't put much effort into a graphic for this one because ultimately there aren't any playing 4.5 million goalkeepers, right? You've got only 2 that have scored points, and both have obviously scored limited points because they've come off the bench. Jaros of Liverpool, the guy that came on for Alisson when he got injured in game week 7. And then Fabianski, Areola got injured before the previous international break, and I think he played like 60 minutes or so only got 1 point from that. Obviously, there are no starting goalkeepers at this price point, right? The only thing I would say in terms of picking a goalkeeper at 4 million is I would pick one from a team that you would never want to triple up on, so you don't have to worry about having too many players from a team, for example. So maybe Dan Bentley, someone like that from Wolves. I don't think I'll ever be tripled up on Wolves this season. Or if possible, and I think there's only a couple of goalkeeper pairings you could actually do this with, but if possible, picking a 4.5 million goalkeeper or even 5, but I don't think there's many 5s whose backups come in at 4. No, it doesn't look like it. So if you have a 4.5 million starting keeper, maybe picking their backup who comes on this list at 4. So I'm thinking Flecken and Voldymarsson, I think, of Brentford is a good double up, and likewise Areola and Fabianski, because if your first choice goalkeeper gets injured, it saves yourself a transfer, particularly if you don't see yourself being tripled up on West Ham or Brentford at all this season. But ultimately, that would kind of be my selection criteria on a 4 million goalkeeper. There's much of a muchness in it in terms of who you pick. None of them are really going to score any points this season because they're not going to start. It's just up to you who you think is best, really. All right, with all that in mind then, I've selected my favourite goalkeepers that I would pick from each price point. Premium-wise, I think Raya is the best. Pickford, Onana at kind of the 5 million price point, I think are best at that price point, like I've already said. And then I've got 4 picks at the 4.5-ish million price category as well. Sanchez, Sells, Henderson, and Kelleher. Ultimately, when I look at all of these goalkeepers in terms of value per million, if that makes sense, I don't think there's a whole lot between them. If I was to make a bet on who I think will be the top scoring goalkeeper throughout this season, I'd probably put money on Pickford or Onana. I think the 2 of them will get, like I keep saying, an average amount of clean sheets and a good amount of saves every game. So I think one of those 2 will probably be the top scoring goalkeeper in the whole game this season. But I think there are times where you could pick Raya, particularly when Arsenal have a fantastic looking defensive fixture run coming up. Or you could just pick him anyway because you believe Arsenal are the best defence in the league. You're seeing his saves number, thinking they're pretty good. And Arsenal are not just the best defence in the league for like a few games or one season. They're the best defence in the league statistically for the last couple of years. So they've got a decent, sample size of data to suggest that. And also when you go down to the cheaper goalkeepers as well, you're still, in my mind, getting value for money. I don't believe necessarily, maybe Sanchez could, but I don't believe Sells, Henderson and obviously Kelleher won't because he'll play limited games, but those kind of 4.5 million goalkeepers, I don't believe they'll quite score the points total of Pickford and Onana, but I still think they'll prove to be worth their money in terms of kind of points per million. So ultimately, I would say my kind of advice when looking at your goalkeepers to pick, I would say, obviously it depends how much the rest of your team costs. I would kind of actually build the rest of my FPL team before picking a goalkeeper, because I think points per million wise, they're all going to be around the same. Like these top keepers are all going to be around the same. So yeah, pick the rest of your team, and depending on how much money you have left for a goalkeeper, I'd look to one of these on this list, depending on obviously how much you have left. Raya, if you've got a good amount of cash left and fancy him, go for him. Pickford and Onana, if you've got around 5 million. Ultimately, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot between Pickford and Onana. Onana's had a better start to the season, but Everton's fixtures change now, and I think Pickford will start to rise above Onana in terms of point over this run. And then you got those 4.5 million goalkeeper picks, right? You could have Sells and Henderson if you, or Kelleher even, if you want a short run with 4.5 in the bank. If you got a little bit more, go for Sanchez. So yeah, in terms of the best goalkeepers in the game, I would say it's these 7 on this list. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. I know talking about goalkeepers for too long is probably a little bit boring, because ultimately there's only really one spot for one in your FPL team. So obviously there's 7 goalkeepers there, and ultimately I think there's probably going to be much for muchness between them, if I'm totally honest. But we all need to pick a goalkeeper that we're happy with, and this is the start of a 4-part series. So we're easing you into it with the goalkeepers. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments who your favourite goalkeepers in the game are, and if you're looking to potentially bring another one in. I think that's everything. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, like I said, and I'll catch you in my next video.